in the vast borderland between a dense forest and an open savanna, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind and the tall grass danced to the rhythm of the sun. There lived a gorilla named Goro. He was unlike any other of his kind, not just in strength or size, but in his solitude. Once a proud silverback of a thriving troop, Goro had become a shadow of his former self after losing his entire family to the cruelty of hunters. He had escaped with scars, both on his body and his heart, and had taken refuge at the edge of the forest, where the trees were thick enough to hide pain but thin enough to let in memories. Goro rarely ventured far. He had no reason to. Days passed in silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of a squirrel or the distant call of birds. He climbed trees not for joy, but for necessity. He gathered fruit not for a feast, but to survive. And he sat alone not by choice, but because the world had taken all his choices away. But then, one morning, everything changed. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across the dew-soaked leaves. Goro was near a stream, reaching for a low-hanging cluster of ripe guavas, when a soft sound caught his ear, a faint whimper, barely louder than the buzzing insects. His massive frame froze. It wasn't the cry of a bird or the squeak of a monkey. It was something else, something hurting. Following the sound, he moved slowly, pushing aside tall grasses and ferns until he saw a dark shape curled beneath a bush. It was small, trembling, and breathing fast. At first, he didn't recognize what it was. But then it moved, and he saw the sleek black coat, the powerful yet small limbs, and the golden eyes that flickered with fear. It was a cub, a black leopard cub, injured, alone, and barely old enough to hunt on her own. Goro knew the savanna's rules well. A cub left alone usually meant the mother was gone, and in this unforgiving land, that usually meant death. Goro's heart, toughened by grief, shuddered with a pang he hadn't felt in years. He didn't think, he simply reached out. The cub flinched, letting out a feeble growl. But she was too weak to move. There was a gash along her back leg. Dried blood caked around the wound. Goro lifted her gently, cradling her as he had once done for his own kin. She was lighter than she looked, fragile in a way that frightened him. He brought her back to his shelter, a nest he'd built high in a tangle of branches. Safe from predators and hidden from view. He tore strips from broad banana leaves, soaked them in water from the stream, and pressed him to her wound. Days passed. Goro stayed by her side, offering fruit mashed into paste, pressing cool leaves to her fevered body, humming low, soothing sounds he thought he'd forgotten. And slowly, the cub began to heal. At first, she merely opened her eyes more often, tracking him with suspicion and curiosity. Then came the strength to sit up, to lick at her wound. Finally, one morning, she ate from his hand, not just out of need, but trust. It was a small thing, but to Goro, it felt like a sunrise after years of dusk. He named her Luna, after the moon whose pale light had watched over them both in those quiet nights. Luna, with her obsidian fur and eyes that held the depth of the night sky. She grew quickly, fueled by Goro's care and the abundance of fruit he offered. But more than strength, she grew in spirit. She began to play, at first hesitantly, batting at twigs and chasing beetles. Then with more confidence, pouncing at Goro's toes or climbing onto his back when he sat too still. Their bond was not loud, not flashy. It was built in small moments, the way she curled beside him at night, the way he shielded her from sudden storms, the way she would bring him shiny pebbles as if they were treasures. They didn't speak, of course, but they understood each other more deeply than many who did. Still, the world beyond their small refuge did not forget them. Luna's presence did not go unnoticed. Other creatures of the savanna began to scent her trail, curious about the young predator hidden in the trees. One day, a trio of baboons came too close. They snarled and shrieked at Goro's nest, baring their teeth in challenge. Goro met them with a roar that shook the branches, a thunderous declaration that this was his home, and she was under his protection. They fled, but danger wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in the quiet. One dry season afternoon, Goro returned from gathering figs to find the nest empty. Luna was gone. Panic surged through him. He dropped the fruit, his massive fists pounding the ground as he scanned for any sign. Broken leaves, a snapped twig, paw prints. He found them, small, light, moving fast toward the savanna, toward the open danger. He followed, heart hammering like a drum. He found her near a dried-up creekbed, facing a lone jackal that had clearly seen an opportunity in a wandering cub. Luna's back was arched, her teeth bared, but she was still too young, too small. The jackal lunged. Goro didn't think, he charged. His roar was a force of nature, his fists striking the earth as he came between Luna and the predator. The jackal turned tail and fled, yelping in fear. Luna crouched behind him, shaking. Goro knelt beside her and gently pulled her close. Not scolding, not angry, just relieved. She leaned into him, pressing her face into the curve of his arm. After that day, she never wandered far again. Seasons passed. Luna grew stronger, faster, her once wounded leg now a mark of resilience. Goro aged too, the silver on his back spreading like frost. But he smiled more now, in his own quiet way. The ache of his past had softened, replaced by the rhythm of a life rebuilt. Together, they formed something neither had known they needed, a family, born not of blood, but of healing. And so, in the shade of trees and under the watching stars, a gorilla and a black leopard cub lived on, side by side, two souls once broken, now whole in the most unexpected way. In the heart of the wild, where survival is the only law, they had found something rarer than safety. They had found each other. As the sun traced its arc across the sky, casting long golden shadows through the forest canopy, life in Goro and Luna's corner of the world settled into a rhythm of quiet companionship. It was the kind of bond that asked for nothing but offered everything, a steady presence, a heartbeat near your own, a soul that understood yours without needing words. Goro had never known what it meant to be a teacher. Once, long ago, He had imagined passing down his strength and wisdom to his own offspring. But that life had been stolen from him. He thought that part of himself had vanished with it. Yet now, each morning brought something new, not just survival, but shared purpose. He would rise at dawn, stretching his thick limbs beneath the growing warmth of the sun. Beside him, Luna would yawn wide, fangs glinting, before rubbing her head against his arm in a sleepy greeting. Then their day would begin. Never with plans or schedules, but with instinct and trust. Goro began to teach her, not like a gorilla would teach another gorilla, but in a language of movement and example. He showed her how to test a branch's strength before climbing, how to listen for the warning rustle of snakes in the leaves, how to read the sky for signs of approaching storms. When they climbed, he led first, his immense weight testing the path. Luna, lithe and sure-footed, followed with quick, silent grace. In turn, Luna offered gifts of her own. She was quick where he was strong, silent where he was broad. She would dart into hollow trees and under stones, emerging triumphantly with fat beetles or wriggling grubs, food that Goro never liked but learned to accept with a grunt and a small, grateful smile. And when the nights turned cold, when the wind howled through the trees and the rain fell in cold sheets, she curled beside him, her fur a warm blanket, her purring a soft lullaby that eased the ache in his bones. They spoke not a word, yet their world was full of conversations. A twitch of Luna's tail meant she'd heard something. A tilt of Goro's head meant she should stay close. When danger was near, a python, a hyena, even just the creak of an old tree about to fall, they moved as one. Their movements practiced and fluid. They didn't need language. They had each other. Sometimes, Goro would catch her watching him, her golden eyes bright with curiosity and affection. In those moments, something would stir in him, deep and aching, not sadness, but wonder at how a bond like this could grow between two such different creatures. He had raised her, yes, but she had saved him too. The forest began to notice. Birds paused their songs when the pair passed beneath. Antelope lifted their heads warily, not knowing whether to flee or to watch. Even the other primates, once distant and disinterested in Goro's strange exile, began to chatter with nervous excitement when they glimpsed the unlikely duo moving through the trees. "Did you see them?" they would whisper. "The black leopard and the silverback. Like father and daughter," others said. "They hunt together. They sleep together. They are one." The rumor spread beyond the forest. In the dry edges of the savanna, lions grunted their confusion. In the rocky hills, old leopards muttered with disdain or awe. And among the trees, the younger monkeys began mimicking the strange pair, pretending to be fierce panthers or lumbering gorillas, laughing and playing in the image of something that, without them knowing, had become legend. But Goro and Luna didn't hear the rumors. They were too busy living them. One afternoon, they discovered a mango tree in full bloom. Goro, delighted, tore into the fruit with the enthusiasm of a child. Luna, however, was more reserved, watching him, sniffing the mangoes, before finally biting into one. The sweet juice dripped down her chin and she gave Goro a look of exaggerated disgust. He rumbled with laughter, a deep, echoing sound that made the leaves tremble. Luna batted a mango at him in mock offense. And he caught it in one hand, grinning. Another time, Luna got stuck in a hollow log while chasing a squirrel. Goro had to pry the bark apart carefully to pull her out. She emerged covered in moss and twigs, scowling, and Goro couldn't help but hoot with laughter. She tackled him in revenge. And they rolled in the leaves like children. But not every day was light. One dusk, a thunderstorm struck suddenly. Lightning cracked the sky, splitting a nearby tree in half. Goro scooped Luna into his arms and carried her through the deluge to a cave they had discovered months earlier. Inside, they sat in silence, the cave lit by flashes of stormlight, the rain beating against stone like war drums. Luna leaned against him, shivering slightly, her eyes wide. Goro placed a hand gently on her back, shielding her from the wind. And for the first time, Luna reached up and licked his face, one slow, deliberate gesture of love. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of it fill him. That night, they didn't sleep, they sat together, awake through the storm, hearts beating in harmony. As Luna grew older, her body changed. She became lean and powerful, her legs stretching, her muscles rippling under her dark coat. She was fast now, so fast Goro couldn't always keep up. But she always waited. No matter how far she ran, she would stop, look back, and wait for him to catch up. She could have left. She could have gone to find her own kind. But she didn't, because he was her kind now. And he knew, in his bones, that she was his too. There was a day when a group of young gorillas came close to Goro's part of the forest. They watched from afar, murmuring to one another, unsure what to make of the massive silverback and the shadow that walked beside him. One of them, bolder than the rest, stepped forward and called to Goro in the old tongue, words of challenge, of brotherhood, of invitation. Goro stood tall, his eyes calm. He didn't respond with anger, nor did he ignore them. He simply placed a hand on Luna's shoulder and shook his head once. The young gorillas watched as Luna moved to stand beside him, her form sleek, her eyes proud. The message was clear. This was his troop now. Small, perhaps, unusual, yes, but real, and complete. The young ones left, murmuring not with disdain, but with wonder. Later that night, as the moon bathed the trees in silver light, Luna rested her head on Goro's chest. His heart beat slow and steady beneath her ear. He watched the stars through the gaps in the canopy, the same stars he had once stared at in loneliness and sorrow. Now, they looked different, not because they had changed, but because he had, and in that peaceful silence, where no words were needed, Goro finally understood something he hadn't dared to before. Family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built. And in a world that so often tore lives apart, he and Luna had done something extraordinary. They had chosen each other. The morning sun rose gently over the horizon, bathing the edge of the savanna in a warm, amber glow. The tall grass swayed in waves under the breeze. whispering secrets of the wild. Goro and Luna stood at the boundary between forest and field, where trees began to thin and the world opened wide under the sky. It was one of their favorite spots, a place of play, of peace. Luna would chase insects through the golden grass, her movements a blur of grace and youthful energy. Goro would watch, occasionally tossing a stick or swatting at the leaves like a lazy challenge. That morning was no different. At first, Luna darted through the brush, her sleek black coat glistening with dew, her tail flicking like a dancer's ribbon. Goro sat under a short acacia tree, watching her with quiet affection, chewing on a handful of roots. The air smelled sweet, filled with the aroma of wildflowers and fresh earth. But then, something shifted. The birds stopped singing, the breeze paused, the world, so vibrant just a moment before, held its breath. Luna froze mid-leap, her ears twitched, her nose lifted slightly, catching a scent she hadn't smelled in months, but one she would never forget. She turned sharply to look at Goro. He was already standing. From the grass, tall and golden and deceptive in its gentleness, two shadows emerged. Lions. Not just any lions, males. Large and hungry, their golden manes matted from travel, their amber eyes burning with arrogance. One had a scar across his nose. The other bore a torn ear. Luna knew them. Every part of her remembered them. They were the ones who had chased her mother. The ones whose roars had echoed through the trees as her world crumbled. The ones who had left her an orphan. Now, they were here again. Goro stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Luna and the lions. He could feel her trembling just behind him, pressing into the back of his legs. His massive hands curled into fists, and his chest rose and fell like a drumbeat building toward war. The lions paused, eyeing him with vague curiosity. One of them let out a low, amused growl. To them, Goro wasn't a threat. He was just odd. A lone gorilla, at the edge of the savannah, and beside him, a small, shivering leopard, young, female, not yet fully grown. To predators like them, it was not a confrontation. It was an opportunity. Lunch. The scarred lion stepped forward. Goro widened his stance. The ground seemed to still beneath his feet. Luna's breathing was shallow and fast. Goro could hear it, could feel it in the vibrations of her body against his. He didn't look back. Instead, he reached one arm behind him. Not for strength, but for reassurance, placing a gentle hand over her paw. A message without words. You are not alone. The lions split, one moving left, the other right, circling. Goro turned with them, never exposing his back, keeping Luna at the center of his stance. He grunted once, low, rumbling, a warning, but the lions weren't listening. The second one lunged. It was fast, faster than anything Goro had ever faced. But he was ready. With a roar that shook the trees, he met the lion's leap head-on, sidestepping and bringing his massive fist down with the force of falling stone. His blow landed on the lion's shoulder, sending it sprawling with a surprised yelp. Dust exploded into the air. The other lion snarled and charged from the side. Goro turned too slow, But Luna didn't. With a scream that sounded more jaguar than leopard, she launched herself from behind him. Claws extended, striking the lion across the muzzle. Blood sprayed. The beast howled, shaking her off violently, but the distraction gave Goro the second he needed. He slammed into the lion like a landslide. They fought in a chaos of claws, teeth, and fury. Goro's skin tore beneath fangs. The lion's ribs cracked under his blows. Luna danced through the fray like a shadow, darting in and out, biting, slashing, distracting. For every injury they suffered, they returned it in kind. The first lion, regaining his feet, joined again. Now it was 2 against 2, though one pair was small and bruised, the other large and built for the kill. Still, the fight raged. The ground turned red with effort. Goro's breaths came like thunder. Luna's sides heaved with exhaustion. But she would not stop. They would not surrender. And then, something changed. The scarred lion, the leader, faltered. Blood poured from his snout. And his front paw dragged slightly, likely broken. He turned to his companion, snarled something deep in his throat, and stepped back. The other hesitated. Goro stood tall, his arms bloodied, his chest heaving, his eyes burned not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Conviction. That lion looked into Goro's eyes and, for the first time, saw not prey, not even a rival, but something ancient, something unbreakable, a protector. With a final snarl, the 2 lions turned and melted back into the grass. Gone. Silence returned, heavy and slow. Birds began to chirp again. Cautiously, the wind picked up, tugging at torn leaves and scattered fur. Goro sagged to his knees. Luna rushed to him, licking the gash along his brow, nuzzling his neck with frantic energy. He placed one arm around her, pulling her close, burying his face into the curve of her shoulder. They were both bleeding, both shaking, but they were alive. Together, they remained like that for a long time, just holding, breathing, feeling the enormity of what had just happened. Goro knew, without question, that had Luna not jumped into the fight, he might not have survived. And Luna knew, without a doubt, that if Goro hadn't stood between her and those lions, she would have become a memory. Their bond, forged in peace, had now been tempered in battle. That night, back in their nest high in the trees, they lay beside one another without words. Goro's arm was draped protectively over Luna, who curled against him, her eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They did not need to speak. Their silence was not empty. It was full. Full of promises. Full of history. Full of love. Far below, in the forest, whispers spread among the animals again. The black leopard and the silverback stood against lions. She did not run. He did not fall. They are more than kin. They are legend. And above them, the stars blinked in quiet witness, as if bowing to a truth older than time itself. Family is not born. It is chosen. It is fought for. It is kept, even in the face of death. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting sharp shadows over the edge of the savanna, where grass met trees and danger met sanctuary. Goro stood there, battered, bloodied, but unbroken, his massive form rising like a mountain between Luna and the two lions that now stalked them. Moments earlier, the fight had exploded like a storm. Claws had met fists, fangs had tasted flesh, and the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the fury of the battle. But now, in this breathless moment, Goro and Luna were pressed against the roots of a twisted baobab. Cornered, Goro's limbs ached, his chest heaved, and his vision blurred from a cut above his brow. Luna crouched behind him, one shoulder torn and bleeding. Her breathing shallow, yet her eyes remained locked on the lions. Filled with fire, the lions circled, slow and certain, confidence radiating from their every step. They were hunters, born and bred for this moment. 2 against 1, and their prey was tired. But what they didn't understand, what they had never been taught to recognize, was that Goro was not just a creature of strength. He was a creature of love. He knew he couldn't win. His body was too worn, his muscles trembling from effort. He had already poured everything he had into keeping Luna safe. There was no clever trick, no secret weapon, only this. He would not let them take her, even if it cost him everything. Goro took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air thick with dust and sweat and fear. Then he rose to his full height, towering, imposing, yet more than anything else, present. His back was straight, his fists clenched, his heartbeat was steady. He pounded his chest, once, twice, 3 times. The sound rang through the clearing, deep, echoing, defiant, not a challenge. Not a roar of dominance, but a statement of something purer. She is mine to protect. Then he let out a scream, a sound that split the sky. Not the cry of a beast, but of a father. It carried pain and fury and love. And it hit the lions not in their ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere instinct could not touch. They paused. It wasn't fear, exactly, that made them stop. It was confusion, hesitation. They saw in Goro not a rival for territory, not a competitor for prey, but something foreign, alien. He was not supposed to be like this. He was supposed to run, to break, to surrender. Instead, he stood tall, shielding the broken black cub behind him with every inch of his massive frame. And what confused them most wasn't his size, or his roar, or even his readiness to die. It was his love. The scarred lion, who had led the charge, took a step back. His eyes narrowed, his muscles remained tensed. But his tail flicked in uncertainty. The other lion, slightly younger, eyes brighter, let out a low growl. But even he didn't move forward. Because they were predators. But they were not monsters. And what they saw before them now was no longer prey. It was something sacred. Luna peeked from behind Goro's leg, blood dripping from her wound. Her golden eyes locked onto the lions, and for the first time, she saw the uncertainty in them. Not rage, not hunger, hesitation. She felt something swell inside her, something as primal as any roar. But quieter, deeper. He's doing this for me. Luna stepped forward, her body pressed against Goro's side. Not to hide this time, but to stand with him. Her head was low, her tail steady, her muscles trembling, but her resolve was set. Together, they faced the lions. The moments stretched long. The wind stirred the grass. A hawk cried in the distance. Then, at last, the lead lion took another step back. He looked at Goro again. Long and hard. What passed between them could never be put into words. But it was understood. He turned. The second lion lingered, eyes still curious, still burning, but when his companion walked, he followed. The grass swallowed them both. Gone. Goro exhaled. The fight was over, not because he had overpowered them, but because he had overwhelmed them with something they didn't expect. Love. He staggered, his knees wobbling. Luna immediately leaned into him, helping him lower his body gently onto the cool earth. They didn't speak, they couldn't, but their silence was thick with meaning. Luna licked his hand. Once, Goro looked down at her, gently brushing her ear with the back of his knuckles, a gesture soft as the wind. His fingers trembled not from weakness, but from everything he had held inside: fear, pain, love. Later, as the sun dipped below the trees and painted the sky in shades of fire, they returned to their shelter slowly, limping side by side. The forest greeted them with reverence. Monkeys chatted softly from above, not mocking, but respectful. A small herd of antelope froze in place as they passed, and then dipped their heads slightly before moving away. Even the birds sang more quietly that night, as if honoring a moment they could not fully comprehend. The tale would spread quickly. The silverback who stood against lions, not for pride, but for love. The black panther who did not flee, because she was not alone. In their nest, high above the earth, Goro and Luna lay curled against each other. She nuzzled into his chest, purring softly, her wounds healing slowly beneath the warmth of his body. He placed one heavy arm around her. Protectively, tenderly, he stared up at the stars. Long ago, they had been distant to him, cold and unreachable, like the memories of the family he had lost. But now, they seemed closer, not just lights, but witnesses, watching, remembering. He closed his eyes. He had not been strong enough to defeat the lions, but he had been strong enough to stand. And sometimes, that was the truest power of all. Not fists, not fury, but love. Unshakable, unyielding, undeniable. And in the darkness, in the hush of leaves and night and stars, a new truth was born in the wild, a truth passed from mouth to mouth, paw to paw, wing to wing. There was once a silverback who loved like fire, and the world stepped back, not in fear, but in awe. The heat of the moment still hung thick in the air. Dust spiraled lazily where claws had torn the earth. The tall grasses around them swayed with a deceptive gentleness, belying the violence that had just nearly erupted. Goro stood firm, his wide chest rising and falling like the breath of a storm. His fur was streaked with sweat and blood, his body a map of fresh bruises and ancient scars. And behind him, trembling but unyielding, Luna pressed close, her golden eyes fixed on the lions with both defiance and fear. Two lions stood at the edge of the clearing, their forms bathed in sunlight and menace. The larger one, The older one, marked with a ragged scar across his nose, let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a threat. It was something else. Something confused, almost contemplative. His eyes, sharp as flint, stared not at Goro's fists or Luna's claws but at the way the massive silverback had stood, arms spread, chest bared, body a living shield for the fragile creature behind him. He had never seen anything like it. The lion's world, like that of every predator, was governed by instinct, by strength, hierarchy, survival. He had fought rivals, torn apart prey, even driven other males from prides. But never had he witnessed a creature choose to face certain death not for dominance, not for food, but for something else. Love. It was the only word that made sense of what he was seeing. He could feel it, strange and unspoken, like a scent on the wind. That gorilla, wounded, overpowered, exhausted, hadn't backed down. Not for pride, not for territory, for her. The lion's growl faded into silence. He took one step back. His companion, younger and less certain, tensed. He looked between his brother and the pair of animals before them, one bleeding, one broken, both still unbowed. He could still attack. He could still win. But for what? The kill would taste bitter. There would be no triumph here. Only desecration. He held his ground for a moment longer. Then, slowly, cautiously, he too began to retreat. Golden eyes never leaving Goro's. And just like that, the threat was gone. The lions vanished into the grass as silently as they had appeared, leaving behind only paw prints in the dust and a silence so deep it rang in the ears. Goro didn't move for a long time. His great frame stood like a monument, carved from stone, rooted to the earth, his arms slowly lowered, his breath beginning to ease. Then, without a word, he turned and knelt beside Luna, brushing his hand gently against her shoulder, inspecting the gash along her fur. She leaned into him, weakly, but her eyes sparkled, not with victory, with awe. They had not won a battle. They had changed something far older than violence, something in the hearts of even lions. Word spread quickly, as it always does in the wild, not through speech, but through the quiet transmission of awe, the kind that rustles through the canopy, leaps from treetop to burrow, flies on wings and echoes in low rumbles beneath the earth. The story morphed as it passed from creature to creature. They said that the gorilla stood taller than any beast had ever stood, and that when he roared, even the wind stopped to listen. They said the black leopard, though still young, had the heart of a lioness, and that her courage turned teeth away. They said the lions saw something that day, something beyond hunger, beyond dominance. A force stronger than instinct. Love. From that day forward, the names Goro and Luna were no longer whispered in surprise or confusion. They were spoken with reverence. Among the forest apes, they became a legend of protection and kinship. Among the leopards, a tale of survival and loyalty. Even the lions spoke of them, not in derision, but in a hushed, grudging respect. The thorns of instinct had been pricked by something greater. No one could quite explain how. Perhaps it was in Goro's eyes. When he stood without hesitation between the jaws of death and the soul he cherished most. Perhaps it was in the way Luna refused to flee, though her body screamed for escape. Or perhaps it was simply that the wild, for all its cruelty, could still be moved by devotion, moved by a bond that ignored blood and species and every rule the world had laid down. Goro and Luna returned to their quiet life at the edge of the forest, where the trees met the plains and everything in between whispered their names. They healed slowly. Goro's bruises faded. His limp receded. Luna's wounds closed, though the scar across her shoulder remained, a badge of bravery she wore without shame. Their days returned to simple rhythms, gathering fruit, watching clouds, racing through sun-dappled trails. But something had shifted. Now, when they walked, the creatures of the forest stepped aside not in fear, but in honor. Now, when they rested, birds gathered above in silent vigil. Even the young gorillas who once kept their distance now approached from time to time, bringing offerings of berries, seeking stories in the way young ones do. Goro did not speak to them. He didn't need to. The story was already written in the scars on his knuckles, in the strength of his arms, and in the gentle way he held Luna's paw when they lay side by side at dusk. Luna, now nearing adulthood, was a graceful huntress, fast, quiet, sharp, but she never left Goro's side. She hunted alone only when needed, and always returned before the stars rose. No territory tempted her, no call of the wild pulled stronger than the bond they shared. They had been forged not in blood, but in fire, not in fate, but in choice. One day, as the dry season waned and the air thickened with promise of rain, Goro sat on a rise above the savanna, Luna at his side. The grass rippled like an ocean before them, golden in the setting sun. A shape appeared far off, two lions, walking side by side. Goro watched them. One of them was the scarred one. The lions did not come closer. They stood, watching for a while, then turned and moved on. Goro exhaled. Luna nudged his arm, and he looked down at her. There was a peace in her eyes. She understood. Something had changed in the world. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that love, when held like a flame and defended like a fortress, could leave even the fiercest beasts pausing at its light. They turned back to the trees, side by side, not just as friends, not just as family, but as proof that the wild, despite its savage rules, still had space for miracles. And in the heart of that miracle stood Goro and Luna, no longer just a silverback and a black leopard, but a living legend, not for how they fought, but for what they refused to surrender. Their hearts, to fear, to hate, to instinct. From that day forward, they were not feared or pitied. They were remembered. And in every paw print pressed into the dust, in every whisper carried by the wind, the savanna spoke softly of the day when love stood taller than power, and the wild stood still to witness it.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.